In the summer of 1961, a fire lookout named Frances Odell Hartley sat alone in a glass room at the top of a mountain in southern New Mexico and wrote one word in her logbook that she would spend the rest of her life refusing to explain. The word was counted. Just that. She was 44 years old. For 7 summers, she had watched that horizon for smoke, and in more than 1,000 pages of daily logs, she had never once recorded anything that was not weather, wind, or fire. Dry entries, clipped. The handwriting of a woman who had been a 4th-grade teacher for 19 years before she ever climbed a tower. And for 39 years after that summer, she said nothing to a single living person about what put that word on the page. Then she died. A footlocker came down off a shelf in a garage in Silver City, New Mexico, and the logbooks came down with it. Every volume from every season she had worked, stacked and rubber-banded and labeled in her own precise hand. Every volume but one. The summer of 1961 is missing. Why would a woman who recorded everything leave a gap exactly where the answer should be? That gap is where I have to start. Let me tell you who Frances Hartley was, because none of this works unless you understand the kind of person telling it. She was not, by any account I have been able to assemble, a woman inclined toward wonder. Her niece, Carol Hartley Reyes, who lives now outside Deming and who let me sit at her kitchen table for the better part of a day, described her aunt as the least fanciful person I ever met. Frances did not go to church. She did not read the kind of magazines that ran flying saucer covers in the 1950s, and in that decade, in that part of the country, those covers were everywhere. When the subject came up, Carol says, her aunt would fold the magazine closed and change the subject with a flatness that ended conversations. She kept her own accounts. She reconciled her checkbook to the penny. She had taken the lookout job in 1954, after her husband died and the classroom stopped fitting, because it paid a summer wage and because, in her words, recorded in a letter to her sister, "You cannot lie to a mountain, and it will not lie to you." So when I tell you that this woman wrote counted in a logbook and then spent 4 decades refusing to say why, hold on to the specific shape of her. Careful people who write one strange word do not do it lightly, and they do not, as a rule, remove the volume that would have told you what the word meant. The lookout stood on Cerro Prieto, a bald granite peak in what was then the Aldridge National Forest, roughly 9,000 feet up, 40 miles from the nearest town of any size. A 14-by-14 glass cab on steel legs, a catwalk running the whole way around it. Inside, bolted to a waist-high stand at the exact center of the room, an Osborne fire finder, a heavy brass disc marked off in 360 degrees, with a sighting aperture on each side that a lookout lines up on a column of smoke to read its precise bearing. That instrument is the whole job. You see smoke, you sight it, you read the azimuth, you call it down the radio to the men who go and put it out. Frances could read a bearing to within 1/4 of a degree, and her logs prove it. Page after page, date, time, wind speed, visibility, and, when there was anything to see, an azimuth and a note. Lightning strikes tallied in the margins with small vertical strokes, 4 and a slash, 4 and a slash, the way you count anything you intend to add up later. She counted strikes the way some people count sheep. It calmed her, Carol thinks. It was the ordering of a chaotic sky into numbers she could hand to somebody else. Now hold that image, because it is the thing that breaks. The first anomaly in her logs is not the word counted. It comes earlier, and it is quieter, and if you were not reading closely, you would slide right past it. Beginning in July of 1959, in the surviving logbook from that season, a bearing starts to repeat. 247 degrees, southwest, toward the head of a canyon that Frances, in an aside to her sister, called the Deep One, where the light gets strange at dusk. 247 degrees. It appears first on the night of July 9th, 1959, at 10:40 in the evening, with a note 4 words long. Light low, no smoke. A lookout's job is smoke, which is a daytime thing. A light at night, at a fixed bearing, with no fire under it, is not something the job has a box for. She logged it anyway, because she logged everything. Then it happened again. July 12th, July 19th, August 2nd. Always after full dark. Always within a few degrees of 247. Always the same terse hand. Light low. Light, no smoke. Same bearing. I counted, across the 2 surviving summers on either side of the missing one, 31 separate entries at that exact bearing. 31. Not a light that came once and frightened a lonely woman into a story. A light that kept an appointment, at the same compass reading, for years, and was met each time by a person whose entire professional discipline was to measure things and refuse to decorate them. Here is what a skeptic says, and I will say it for you, so you know I have said it. A distant ranch, a vehicle on a forest road, a prospector's campfire, Venus low on the horizon in a season when it sits southwest at dusk. Every one of these is a real explanation, and on a given night, every one of them is probably correct somewhere. But a light does not sit at a fixed bearing for years if it is a car, because cars move and roads bend. A planet does not appear only after full dark at a single azimuth and then vanish before dawn, because a planet arcs across the sky. And a woman who could read a bearing to a quarter of a degree, who tallied lightning like a bookkeeper, does not confuse Venus for something worth 31 separate notations. The mundane explanations do not fail because they are impossible. They fail because they do not fit the one thing we can actually verify, the numbers in her own hand. I want to be careful here, more careful than I am usually asked to be, because a logbook is not proof of anything except that someone wrote in it. Memory is unreliable. Handwriting is not testimony. And I am aware, believe me, I am aware, of how badly a story like this one wants to be believed by the people who go looking for it, myself among them. So I did not take the logs at face value. I had 2 of the surviving volumes examined by a document specialist who does contract work on insurance fraud, and who, when I approached her, had no idea what she was looking at and no interest whatsoever in the subject. She confirmed 2 things. First, that the ink and the aging were consistent with the dates claimed, that these were not recent forgeries dressed up as old paper. And second, and this is the part I keep returning to, that the entries at 247 degrees were written in the same hand, the same pen, and the same unhurried pressure as the weather notes around them. No tremor, no agitation. A woman recording a mystery in precisely the tone she used to record the wind. That flatness is not the absence of significance. In my experience, it is the fingerprint of a person who has decided that whatever she is seeing is real, and that her only job is to write it down. Which brings me to the summer of 1961, and to the volume that is not in the footlocker. I cannot tell you what Frances wrote that season, because someone made sure I couldn't. But I can tell you 3 things about it, assembled from outside the missing pages, and each one is worse than the last. The first comes from the official record, not Frances's personal logs, but the Forest Service duty log for Cerro Prieto, which by regulation she also kept and filed with the district office. That official log survives, on microfilm, in a regional archive, and for the summer of 1961, it is complete except for a 9-day stretch in late July. 9 days. The film does not skip. The dates are not torn. The entries simply stop on July 23rd and resume, in Frances's hand, on August 1st, as though the last week of July that year had been lifted cleanly out of the calendar. A clerk I spoke with, who has spent 30 years with those microfilm reels, and asked me not to use her name, said she had seen weather gaps and equipment gaps, and the occasional page a mouse had gotten to.
She had never, she said, seen 9 consecutive days removed from a duty log with the surrounding record intact. That's not a lost page, she told me. That's a decision. The second thing comes from the relief lookout, a young man named Delbert Prine, who spelled Frances for 2 weeks each August so she could come down off the mountain. Prine gave a short account in 1994 to an amateur researcher named Owen Castellanos, and I have Castellanos's handwritten notes from it. Prine said that when he came up to relieve Frances on the 1st of August, 1961, she was already packed. Not the way you pack for 2 weeks down the hill, but the way you pack when you are leaving. Her personal logbook, the one that is now missing, was not on the reading stand where she always kept it. He asked her about the light, because by then the light was known to the handful of lookouts in that forest, the way things are known among people who spend their summers alone and compare notes on the radio.
Frances did not answer the question. She looked at him for a while, and then she said one sentence, which Prine repeated to Castellanos 33 years later, and which Castellanos wrote down in block letters and underlined. Do not read the bearing back to it. Do not read the bearing back to it. The third thing is the word itself, counted. It does not survive in the missing 1961 volume, obviously. It survives because Frances wrote it a second time, or rather, because she almost did and stopped. In the 1962 logbook, the first surviving season after the gap, on a night with a light at the familiar bearing, she began an entry. She wrote the number 247. She wrote the word light. And then she began a fourth word. The pen went down. You can see the first stroke of it under a glass, a single vertical line, the beginning of a letter, and then a hard scrape where the nib was dragged sideways off the page. She did not finish it. And here is a detail I cannot get out of my head. In every logbook before the summer of 1961, Frances counted. Lightning strikes, tallied in the margins. Aircraft, when they passed over. Days without rain. She was a woman who added things up. In every logbook after that summer, the tallies stop. Completely. Not one vertical stroke in a margin from August of 1961 until her final entry in 1963. She never counted anything again. A woman whose entire private habit was the sorting of a chaotic world into columns simply stopped, all at once, in the season we are not permitted to read, as if the act of counting had been spoiled for her, as if she had learned that when you count, something counts back. Frances also wrote to her sister, and that matters, because it gives us a second record kept entirely outside the logbooks and beyond the reach of whoever went to the trouble of removing them.
Adeline Hartley Boyce lived in El Paso, and for 9 years the 2 women exchanged letters roughly once a month. Carol has kept them, a shoebox, in order, bound with the same rubber bands Frances used on her logs. In the letters from 1959 and 1960, The light appears the way you would expect a sensible woman to let it appear to her sister, lightly, half joking, folded in among the ordinary. My southwest light is back, she writes in one, punctual as a Baptist. Delbert thinks it's a still, she writes in another, meaning a moonshiner's fire. But a still doesn't keep to the minute. The tone is dry, amused, the tone of a woman who has not yet been frightened. Then comes the last letter before the missing summer, dated the 19th of July, 1961, 4 days before the 9-day hole opens in the duty log. It is short, it does not joke, and its final paragraph, which I have read more times than I would like to admit, says this: I have stopped writing the light down for the office. I am asking you to burn these pages, Addie. And I know you won't. And I am asking anyway. It is not a still, and it is not a plane, and I no longer think it is on the ground. When it is time, you will understand why I could not put it in the log. Watch the children's mail. Watch the children's mail. Adeline had no children. Francis had no children. Nobody who has read that line has ever been able to tell me what she meant by it. And it is the last thing she wrote about the light to anyone, ever. After that summer, the letters resume, monthly, chatty, ordinary, weather and recipes and a new stove. And the light is simply never mentioned again by either sister for the remaining 22 years of the correspondence. 2 women who had joked about it for years fell silent about it in the same season, and stayed silent, as though a door had been shut between them by an agreement neither one ever put into words.
If you have followed me this far, you already understand that this channel is not interested in the tidy version. So before I show you how far this actually goes, if this is the kind of thing you want more of, the accounts nobody will air, followed all the way down, subscribe, because the next part is where the ground gives way. Frances Hartley was not the only lookout on a peak in that forest, writing down a light she could not explain. Castellanos, the amateur researcher, spent the last decade of his life trying to gather the lookout logs from the Aldridge Forest and the 2 forests adjacent to it, and before he died in 2001, he had located 4. 4 lookouts, 4 mountains, 4 sets of logs, spanning the years 1957 to 1964. 3 of the 4 contain entries, dry, professional, unconnected to one another, describing a low light at night at a fixed bearing with no fire beneath it.
And when you take the bearings from each tower and draw them out across a map, the way you would triangulate a smoke column, the lines do not scatter. They converge. All of them point from their separate mountains toward the same patch of ground, the head of that canyon southwest of Cerro Prieto, the deep one, where Francis said the light got strange at dusk. 3 lookouts who never met, on 3 peaks, sighting the same point in the dark from 3 directions across 7 years. I have stood at the very edge of dismissing that as coincidence, and I cannot make the dismissal hold. Consider what would have to be true. 3 trained observers, independently, would have to invent the same fixed light, at the same convergence point, in the same terse professional register, without collaborating, across a span of years, and then each would have to independently stop recording it, and in 2 of the 3 cases, leave the relevant season's volume missing or damaged.
The odds do not merely strain, they come apart in your hands. A single strange logbook is a curiosity. 3 that triangulate is a coordinate. And a coordinate is not something you imagine. It is a location. It is a place on the earth where a thing was, seen by people who had no reason to lie and every professional habit against exaggeration. And the lookouts themselves did not, as a rule, stay. Castellanos noted something in the margins of his own research that he never developed, and that I only understood after I had read all 4 sets of logs myself. An unusual number of the lookouts on those peaks in those years left the job mid-season, before the fires were out, before the wage was fully earned. Not Frances. She finished every summer she started, which is its own kind of unsettling. But the others turned over. A single tower would have 3 different names in its log across one summer. People took the loneliest, most coveted solitary post in the forest, climbed the mountain, watched that horizon for a few weeks, and came down early and never came back. The Forest Service, then as now, put it down to isolation. Isolation is real. But isolation does not usually converge on a single bearing, and the lights were not only seen from the ground. In the 4th box, the one that survived, and I will get to why it survived, Castellanos kept a single page of notes from a conversation he had, in 1996, with a retired Forest Service spotter pilot named Ray Kubek, who flew night fire detection patterns over the Aldridge district in the early 1960s. Kubek told him that on a flight in the summer of 1961, he had seen a light on the ground at the head of a canyon southwest of Cerro Prieto, a steady amber light where his charts showed no road, no cabin, no reason for a light to exist. He circled it twice.
On the second pass, he said, his radio, his compass, and his fuel gauge all went to nonsense in the same instant, and all came back to normal the moment he leveled off and flew away from it. He filed a report, because you file everything. And when he asked a few weeks later what had come of it, he was told there was no report on file matching that date, and advised, in a tone he still remembered 35 years later, not to log night lights he couldn't identify. Not to log them. The same instruction, in different words, that Frances had already given herself. The deeper I went into what happened to these records, the more a particular texture kept repeating, and it is a texture that anyone who does this kind of work learns to recognize. Nothing was ever destroyed. Things were only ever moved, misfiled, reclassified, or quietly absent. Frances felt that pressure firsthand and early. In the surviving 1960 logbook, there is a marginal note in her hand. Not an entry, a reminder to herself, that reads only, DR, official log only. Carol believes DR is the district ranger, a man who appears in the personnel records I could find only as R. Sowards, and that at some point in 1960 he told Frances to keep her observations of the light out of anything but the required duty log. Keep it official. Keep it where it could be pulled. It is a small thing. I know it is a small thing. But it means that as early as 1960, a full year before the summer that vanished, someone in the chain above her had already decided that this light was a thing to be managed rather than explained. Castellanos' own files are the clearest case of all. He was a retired county surveyor, a man, again, whose entire profession was the accurate placement of things on the earth. And he kept his lookout research in labeled boxes in a spare room in Truth or Consequences.
When he died, his daughter began sorting the estate. She told me, and she was matter-of-fact about it in a way that somehow made it worse, that within about 2 weeks of the obituary running, 2 men came to the house. Polite, ordinary clothes. They said they were collecting materials on behalf of an interested party, and they asked, specifically, for her father's lookout files. She was grieving and overwhelmed, and she handed over 3 of the boxes. She kept the 4th only because it was in the garage under a broken evaporative cooler, and she had forgotten it was there. That 4th box is where the notes on Prine, on Kubek, and on Frances survive. The 3 that walked out the front door have never been seen again, and no agency, when I asked, has any record of sending anyone. Follow the same pattern into the official channels, and it holds all the way down. The Forest Service fire report for the Aldridge District for the last week of July, 1961, the same 9 days missing from Francis's duty log, was, according to the Archive Index, reclassified in 1978 and transferred to a federal records center in Colorado. When I filed for it, I was told that the transfer was logged, but that the box had never arrived at the receiving facility, that the discrepancy predated their current tracking system, and that there was, regrettably, no way to resolve it. A report that was sent and never received. A box of research collected by no one on record. A logbook volume gone from a footlocker a family swears was complete when it went onto the shelf. None of these, on its own, is more than an administrative shrug. Together they form a shape, and the shape is always the same. Not a wall built to keep you out. A slow, patient erosion of the path that would have led you in. I have thought a great deal about why it would be a fire lookout. Of all the people to whom this light chose to reveal itself, if choosing is even the right word, and I am not certain it is, why the woman on the mountain whose entire function was to watch? The lookout is a strange figure once you sit with her. She is paid to do nothing but pay attention. She is the first to see. She turns a wilderness into a set of bearings and hands them to the people below so that they can act. Her attention is the instrument. And I keep circling a possibility I don't know how to prove and can't quite set down. That attention of that kind, sustained, disciplined, pointed for years at the same dark horizon, is not a passive thing. That watching, done long enough and carefully enough, is itself a kind of transmission. That Frances Hartley, sighting the deep canyon night after night through a brass ring, reading and recording and adding up, was not simply observing the light. She was, in some way none of our frameworks are built to hold, answering it.
Do not read the bearing back to it. She learned something on that mountain about the difference between seeing and being seen, and it frightened a fearless woman badly enough that she never counted anything again. We tend to think of the unknown as empty space that our knowledge will eventually fill in, like a map with a blank quarter waiting on a survey. But some blanks are not waiting to be filled. Some of them are looking back at the surveyor. Francis's whole trade was the conversion of the unmapped into the measured, bearing, distance, azimuth, tally. And what her logbooks seem to record, in their flat and careful way, is the moment a person discovers that the thing she is measuring has been measuring her the entire time, at its own fixed bearing, with its own patient attention, keeping its own count. She was the watcher on the mountain. She was never the only one watching. I don't know what sat at 247 degrees at the head of that canyon for 7 summers. I am not going to tell you it was a craft or a being or a light with a mind behind it, because I cannot, and because the moment I do I have left the ground where the evidence actually is. What I can tell you is what the record shows and what the record is missing, and the missing is the loudest part of all of it. A woman who wrote down everything left out one summer, a duty log with a 9-day hole and no torn page to explain it. 3 towers whose separate sightings meet at a single point of ground, a pilot's instruments failing in a circle above that same point, a researcher's boxes carried off by men no one can name, a fire report sent into an archive that never received it, and one unfinished word under glass, the first stroke of a letter, then a scrape, from the hand of a person who never left anything unfinished in her life. What did Frances Hartley learn to stop counting, and why did counting become the one thing she could not bear? What convergence sat waiting at the bottom of that canyon, met from 3 directions by 3 people who never spoke to one another? What did she mean when she told her sister to watch the children's mail when there were no children? Who sent the 2 polite men to a grieving daughter's door? And how did they know, within 2 weeks, exactly which boxes to ask for. And if the answer was reclassified and boxed and shipped in 1978, then it existed in 1978, which means it exists now, in a room somewhere, with a label on it, waiting. Somewhere there is a footlocker volume with a summer inside it. Somewhere there are 3 boxes from a garage in Truth or Consequences. Somewhere there is a box that was sent to Colorado and, we are told, never arrived. Frances Hartley climbed down off that mountain in 1963, went home, reconciled her checkbook to the penny for another 22 years, and never wrote another tally in her life. She kept her one word and her one gap, and she took them with her. The bearing is still out there, 247 degrees southwest, toward the deep canyon where the light gets strange at dusk. And the only person who ever sat still enough, long enough, to be answered by it, is gone. If you want the next one, the accounts that get walked out of houses in cardboard boxes, followed all the way to the edge of what we're allowed to know, subscribe, and I'll take you there. Because the count didn't stop when Frances did. It only stopped being written down.